Activate Your Introvert, the weekly show to help leaders build performance by understanding introversion. In this week's show, Introvert Myth of the Week. Introverts are easy to spot, and leads to people saying things like, my friends don't think I'm an introvert because... Leadership tip of the week. Considering aloneliness. Yes, being alonely really is a thing, and you or your team may be more prone to it right now. And a discussion with Lee Delaney. Lee helps introverts who feel stuck or left behind in work to maximise their introvert talents to achieve the career success they want. Just before speaking to Lee, it's been an odd time over the last week, hasn't it? We have now officially in the UK unlocked, although we're encouraged not to. I had my first busy tube train trip in London this week, and I can't say I enjoyed it, although it was great to see some people face to face for the first time in 18 months. There was also an interesting story in one paper following up from my show a couple of weeks ago discussing condoms at the Olympics. Well, following up in my head, that is. The story said the Olympic beds in the Olympic Village are made of cardboard, so they'd collapse if too much socialising was going on. Although Irish gymnast Rhys McClenaghan posted a video himself bouncing up and down on a bed to disprove this story. All of which makes me think again about being alonely. Yes, as I said, it certainly is a thing. It's the opposite of being lonely. As a quick aside, alonely has nothing to do with cowering from people or viruses. Sorry, I had to slip in this week's bad choice of word by a politician in there as a reminder for us all about how important emotive words can be. You might struggle with being alonely in lockdown if you're stuck in a house and can't get away from everybody. But also, having survived lockdown, many people at the moment are surrounded by more people than they've become used to, leading to feelings of being alonely. A dramatic increase in team meetings, just being in the office all day surrounded by others more energetically socialising with you. The good news, of course, that means they missed you. We're all going through a big socialising change again at the moment. If you're feeling alonely, schedule some micro breaks where you can revel in being on your own, even if it's just walking to the shops on your own. But as a leader, be aware that others may be struggling with feeling alonely and the negative feelings that arrive from the perception that one is not spending enough time alone. And that, by the way, could be introverts or extroverts. So allow them or encourage them to get some time on their own. Helping people avoid a negative degenerative cycle, and that's a mouthful, is something we should all try to do, especially as we go through the current changes. What would you like to know about introversion in business? Thank you for this week's question, Simon. Are introverts more likely to be depressed? It was a timely question, having mentioned that negative degenerative cycle earlier in the show and following from the recent interview about mental wealth. There's no direct link between introversion and depression. Some people think introverts are more likely to be depressed, and this belief may be caused by extroverts who don't like being on their own, feeling sad when alone, and assuming that people on their own must feel the same, and that the more on your own you are, the more sad you must be. Introverts do tend to spend more time thinking things through, and I guess if this is done to excess, it could lead towards depression. If you manage introverts, be aware of what introversion is, and separately be aware of any signs of negative mental health and what things you might be able to do to help. They are, however, outside the remit of this show. What question would you like answered on the show? Whether you want to be on the show or just have your question answered like Simon, go to activateyourintrovert.co.uk where there's a box for you to ask your question. You could also follow on Facebook and discuss the answers at the show's page, Activate Your Introvert. The mission of this show is to help you understand introversion and building your business. Just before this week's interview, I want to introduce next week's guest. On the show next week, there's a great discussion about leadership and introversion with CEO of Creative Allies, Amy Thompson. But first, a very warm welcome to Lee Delaney. Welcome, Lee. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, John. Thanks very much for having me. Looking forward to our chat.
I'm really looking forward to it too. No doubt we're going to get into a really good discussion about introverts feeling stuck and left behind in their careers and what they can do to change that. But just before we dive into that, are you an introvert or an extrovert? And perhaps more importantly, what difference does that make to you?
I am very much an introvert. And I think actually over time, I've possibly gotten more introverted or maybe just discovered that, allowed myself to be introverted a bit more, because I think you have that kind of thing when you're a teenager, you want to fit in, but you want to, be socializing and discovering the world and that sort of thing. But I think now that I'm not really a teenager anymore, that I'm very much a card carrying introvert. But what does that mean for me? I think that's a really interesting question that I'm thinking about a lot at the minute, from really engaging in the kind of introvert space and social media and things like that, and developing career coaching for introverts as well. But for me, being an introvert is really about the level of stimulation that your brain is comfortable with. So I tend to go to quite a science kind of definition of introversion. So if you think about it just in terms of people, like introverts would tend to prefer to interact with smaller amounts of people, either one-to-one or in small groups. And that's really a case of if you're interacting with one or two people, that's a lower level of stimulation that you're dealing with than if you're, trying to interact with 30 or 100 people or whatever, that's a lot of noise to deal with. So for me, it really comes down to that level of stimulation that you want to have. I suppose the flip side of that is introverts like a higher level of stimulation, a higher level of kind of energy, and that's what gets them going. But for me, I like a quieter, calmer kind of space so I can concentrate and focus and think.
Interesting. You said something a couple of minutes ago which almost feels illogical, but I kind of know what you meant. So I'm just going to kind of look at it for a second. Many people sit there and say to me that as they've got older, they've developed confidence and therefore they become more outgoing. And that has some logic to it. You actually said the more you've discovered about being introverted, it's made you almost more introverted. On one level, that sounds like it's the opposite. And I'm not sure it is, but any thoughts on that?
You're probably right that it's the opposite. It's definitely been the opposite way for me, but I think you're spot on in that it's the confidence. So what's ended up happening as I've gotten older is that I've developed the confidence to accept my introversion, or I've gotten more comfortable with my introversion. So then I don't feel that kind of nagging thing of, oh, you know what, I'm like 18 or 20 or something. It's like I should have loads of friends and I should be like out at clubs and pubs every weekend. Whereas, very much now I'm like, I really don't care about that.
Okay. So it is makes a bit more sense then. So basically what you're saying is you have grown in confidence, but that's allowed you to be yourself rather than pretending to try and be somebody else. Fabulous.
Yeah, it's really growing into your introversion.
One of the things you do is you help introverts that feel stuck or left behind at work. What is it that causes so many introverts to feel stuck and left behind and needing help to maximize their talents?
Well, I think it's related to what we were just talking about there. I think it's the confidence to be an introvert and to own the kind of traits and talents that introverts tend to have. Some of the really common things that people tend to talk to me about is having difficulties with things like networking. So they find it really difficult to go to networking events, and obviously there are careers where that's a huge part of it. And actually most careers, some kind of networking is an element of that. But if you think of some stereotypical things like sales, management, starting your own business, your kind of specialty, networking is a really big part of that. And a lot of introverts really struggle with it. Another issue that people have with their careers is the way that work can be set up to progress through work where social activities are a part of how you fit into your team, how you fit into the work culture. And we all know this, again, those kind of stereotypes of, the big corporate jobs where it's all like, champagne lunches and
Wouldn't that be nice right now?
dinners and wine and dine and clients and things like that. Obviously reality's a bit different, but the truth there is that actually a lot of careers, the social element to it is really important. I worked for a private company in China that I won't mention that was one of my least favorite experiences, but really taught me a lot about kind of different working cultures and how to cope with those as an introvert. But there was almost enforced social activities on your days off where there's an expectation.
Oh, wow. That doesn't sound so good.
No, it was terrible. And if you didn't join in, then you didn't get the promotions. And I think that's a very common thing. I think particularly in the private sector, I think that's a common complaint that people have as introverts in their careers. And then I think another area would be meetings and presentations. So how do you make yourself heard? How do you put yourself forward and promote yourself? So a lot of people kind of go into a bit of a default listening, allowing other people to take the center stage, allowing other people to get their ideas across. But they've got ideas and they're full of ideas. They just can't quite find the opportunity to input their ideas.
So what stops them?
I think it's a mixture of things, but I think there's a bit of a, not quite navigating that social space in terms of when should I be listening? When should I be speaking? I think there's a bit of an issue around confidence and maybe humility of we don't feel comfortable putting ourselves right in the middle and being on show, which obviously, if you're putting ideas across when you're making a presentation, that is what's happening. And also when you're doing that, when you're sharing your ideas, when you're making a presentation about your work, you're really setting yourself up there to be judged. So there can be a bit of a fear of the judgment that you get. And some introverts find that they can be quite sensitive to, I'm going to say critique rather than criticism, because I think hopefully a lot of people in work situations understand the difference between constructive criticism and just criticizing people.
So do you think that leaders and managers do it deliberately, or is it that they just don't understand introversion?
No, I don't think they do it deliberately. If they do anything deliberately, I think they, through a bit of an unconscious process, just instill a bit of a culture within their teams that just mirrors who they are and what they're comfortable with. And I think everyone does that. I think really the onus is on introverts too. And again, this is getting into like the kind of crux of what people find difficult, but you don't get what you need unless you ask for what you need. So introverts have to actually find ways to speak up and explain what their preferences are.
Yeah, except if a manager's role is to develop their team, should the manager not also be responsible for helping the introvert to explore that too?
Yeah, I mean, that is very right. So there's really an onus there on managers to be listening and asking questions. But I suppose for me, looking at trying to help people kind of through their careers, I'm thinking more of the people at the other end as employees.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to say to people, well, look, you can't sit back and wait for people to figure out that you're an introvert. Again, speaking out doesn't mean that you have to be sitting in a meeting with everyone there and then you start talking about, I'm an introvert, we need to have meetings like this. You can have quiet one-to-one conversations with the manager. You can email them. There are different ways that you can do that communication.
Sure.
But again, I think you're right that managers, you really need to be thinking about the diversity and the different kinds of personalities, so not just introversion, but the different kind of ways that people exist and interact with each other in teams.
So if you offered a tip for non-introverted managers to help the introverts in their team, what would it be?
I think probably the first time you start managing people is to ask what their preferences are for being managed and have like a Trello board or something like that. It is okay. John is an introvert. John prefers to make sure that in advance of meetings that he has an agenda so he knows what's going on, that maybe papers are shared in advance, or they at least know he at least knows what the topic is in advance so he can think about it and work out what he thinks before the meeting starts.
Nice example, yeah. So, and I like that because it's quite simple. It can be quite private. It's a Trello board. It's a notebook. It's whatever. You ask the preferences of your team. Like it. Flipping it the other way, what tip would you offer introverts that are looking to get less stuck, I suppose?
I mean, maybe I'll throw in here to maybe think about using a coach to help you through that process.
There's two of them which I know very well here.
But I think really think about not just your introversion, but your wider personality and how the different aspects of your personality interact with your introversion. And ultimately, don't think that because you're an introvert that you can't network, that you can't give good presentations, that you can't really contribute to meetings, that you can't lead to meetings, or that you can't be a manager or leader, or that you can't set up your own business and take on all of that. It's really just about finding strategies. And you'll know, John, as well as I do, that there are people out there who are introverts and they're doing it. Bill Gates is very much an introvert. And you can't imagine a world without Microsoft products.
No, absolutely. And I think the point is, as you just said, a label might be a great convenient way to discuss something, but you shouldn't be performing down to the label.
Yeah, you can still have high expectations for yourself and for your career. And that's exactly what I want to do, is help people kind of meet the challenge of the high expectations.
Lee, I'm sure that there will be some people that want to get back in touch with you. What's the best way for them to do that?
So you can get in touch on my website. It's introvertevolution.com. I'm also on Instagram, Introvert Evolution as well.
Brilliant. Lee, it's been superb talking to you. Thanks a lot. I loved the chat.
Thanks very much, John. It was really good.
And now it's time for Introvert Myth of the Week. Those crazy stories that I hear and you hear that some people actually believe. Introverts are easy to spot, which often leads to introverts saying things like, "My friends don't think I'm an introvert because I chat a lot. I can be outgoing at work. I enjoy spending time with people." And my favourite two are, "You can't be an introvert as you like being on stage presenting." And my favourite of all time, "You can't be an introvert because you wear orange. Bright orange." And yes, I do. As well as some of those strange statements making people think they can easily spot introverts, many introverts have learnt about an extrovert bias in the workplace and become adept at hiding in plain sight so that they, hopefully, don't get overlooked. But hiding doesn't help people perform at their best. Introversion is about energy, people energy. Introverts tend to be drained by spending time with people. Extroverts are the other way round. Introverts also tend to process their thoughts internally, and extroverts externally. Does your member of staff talk to think, or think to talk?
I'm John Baker. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. There's a new episode every Thursday at activateyourintrovert.co.uk and your favourite podcast provider. Till then, go be introversial, activating your introverts, building your business.